Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about the difference between anxiety and stress. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the EAP, Employee Assistance Program that I work for, they do assessments and they create charts so you can track different areas of mental health. So there's one for depression, there's one for anxiety, there's one for stress, and there's one for mental well-being. Sometimes people ask me, well, isn't anxiety and stress the same thing? Because your anxiety makes you feel overwhelmed, stress makes you feel overwhelmed, stress can cause you to feel anxious, and anxiety can make you feel stressed. So isn't it all the same thing? Well, not really. So yes, they can be intertwined. Your anxiety can make you feel more stressed, or stress can make you feel more anxious, but it's not necessarily the same thing. The reason being is when it comes to stress, it's usually a specific situation that is put upon you that is making you feel stressed. Now, somebody could say, well, isn't anxiety the same thing because you have a trigger? Not really. Anxiety is more feeling based. It doesn't necessarily have to be reality, meaning my mind can trick me into being anxious about something that I don't even need to be anxious about. What happens if my mind just goes down a spiral, makes me think worst case scenario, and I'm anxious and worried and nervous about something that isn't actually going to happen? Whereas with stress, that is usually because something is happening. So maybe there's a change at work and you just got a new responsibility. Well, you're feeling stressed because you have this new responsibility and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed because you're having to learn different, tools or techniques or skills. Whereas with anxiety, it's a feeling. Maybe nothing changed at work, but now you're feeling more anxious and you're wondering, well, why is that? Nothing changed. I'm okay. Well, the reason is because sometimes our mind tricks us when it comes to anxiety, and there's actually nothing that needs to be worried about. So somebody could say, well, what happens when you actually do need to be worried about it? Of course, there are situations where you're anxious for a reason. You're going into a difficult situation and you know it, and so you're feeling anxious. However, I would say the big difference in that situation is anxiety usually persists even after the concern has gone away. So if it is just stress because something specific is happening, again, the example at work, you will adjust. You'll figure out those new skills, you'll learn how to manage the new responsibility, and then most likely that stress will decrease because you will learn to manage it. Whereas anxiety will continue after the fact. Your mind will find other ways to feel anxious. Usually we call it generalized anxiety, meaning it could be about anything. It could be you're anxious about calling a friend to talk about something. You're anxious about the situation that's going on at work. You're anxious about driving. You're anxious about having to go into a social situation because you're afraid you're going to look stupid. The generalized anxiety means that your mind is usually in worry mode and it's looking for certain things to make you feel anxious. So worst case scenario thinking, ruminating thoughts, repeating the same thing over and over and over again. Your mind is making you feel anxious over things that you don't necessarily have to be anxious over. Whereas stress will usually be easier to regulate because you're going to have a specific thing happening to you. And then once that specific thing is done, usually that stress goes away. Okay, the reason why it's very easy to get the two confused is because there are overlapping things. So usually both stress and anxiety will cause trouble with sleeping, digestive issues. Usually people who are very stressed or very anxious, they'll say they have an upset stomach, difficulty concentrating because your mind is in a million different places because you're worried about something or you're stressed about something and it's hard for your mind to focus, and irritability and anger. So again, they have things that are overlapping and it makes sense that people get confused by them. And for all practical purposes, it's okay if you're confused by them or it seems like the same thing. We're just being nitpicky here because the question comes up at work sometimes and I thought it could be helpful information. Whether you classify it as stress or anxiety, either way, as long as you're addressing it, that's what's important. So just to recap, to make sure that it's very clear, because we do have things that are overlapping, we do have certain symptoms that could go into either category. I want to be as clear as possible or be as helpful as possible. So stress is usually tied to a specific situation. Once that situation is taken care of, the stress goes away. Some people have chronic stress because they're dealing with maybe a lot of changes going on, and so it doesn't just automatically go away, but it's still tied to a specific thing that's happening in their life. Anxiety, by contrast, does not always have something attached to it. It is our mind telling us to be worried about things that maybe we don't even have to be worried about. It's us thinking worst case scenario and being prepared for things to go wrong, even though they have not gone wrong. It is those ruminating thoughts that make us feel dread and doom, and it could be across a lot of different areas of life. So with the example I gave, maybe stress is related directly to work. You know it's coming from work. You know it's because you have new responsibilities, whereas anxiety can be stemming in a lot of different places. It's generalized anxiety. It means that it could be because of work, calling a friend, driving, a trip that's coming up. It could be in a whole bunch of different areas because it's not one specific thing that is changing in your life. It is your mind always thinking worst case scenario or preparing for something to go wrong in different areas. Overall, if you're still listening to this video and you're like, Carissa, I can't tell the difference, you're making no sense, and I still don't get it, I would say absolutely look for professional help. There's nothing wrong with going to see a professional. There's nothing wrong with seeing a counselor or a therapist and just saying, hey, this is the situation. Can you please help me manage it? Whether it's anxiety or it's stress is almost irrelevant, because if you need help with something and you're struggling, it's not like, oh, well, if it's stress, you don't need help, and if it's anxiety, you do. I think at the end of the day, you just go and take care of the things that you need to take care of. If you don't want to see a counselor or a therapist, being able to talk to close friends, family members, people that you trust, to just say, hey, this is the situation I'm in. Maybe they could be supportive and helpful. If you're stressed because you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe you can delegate some things to them and they can help. If it's anxiety, maybe you can have somebody to be a support to remind you, like, hey, we don't want to go down that worst case scenario thinking. We want to stay in the present moment. You can also work on staying in the present moment through grounding techniques and mindfulness. But ultimately, what I'm trying to get through in this video is that they are very connected. They might have different root causes or stems for why they're happening, but at the end of the day, stress and anxiety does not feel good. It's not a good time. And if you need help with addressing it, please go see somebody or talk to somebody about it. And I hope that that was helpful. Like I said, I know it's very nitpicky because it's very intertwined. So do the best that you can with dealing with it. Reach out to people, get help, work on your mindfulness, work on your grounding techniques, and continue to stay optimistic that things can change and that this is temporary. Okay, thank you for your time, and I will see you in my next video.